Welcome to Rick's Corner. Many of you asked for me to bring on this special guest, and you've asked me for a long, long time. Bodybuilder, actor, very well known in the 70s, Mr. Roger Callard, which I'm thrilled to have here today. Hello, Roger.
Well, thank you, Rick.
You know, I always confuse you with Lee Majors.
I know, you always used to say that.
I know, the $6 million man.
Unfortunately, I didn't marry Farrah Fawcett or
I know.
have his bankroll, but
It doesn't matter.
had a good run there.
Yeah, you did.
For a while.
All right, let's talk. We've been friends for over 30 years.
Well, since 72.
72, that's right.
That's right.
And we met at Gold's Gym in Venice, the mecca of bodybuilding, back then, the golden era. All right.
Your thumb-free grip, which I always remembered.
Hey, you know you text me that.
I know.
Why'd you say that?
Because you did. You had the thumb-free grip.
Now I've got a finger-free grip.
Now you have a finger.
You mean on my benches?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hoped it never slipped off and hit me.
I know. But you were kind of like me. Once you got in the groove,
Yeah.
you had it.
That's true.
And I think somehow you were able to push a little more with that.
Yeah, I mean, I never feared the fact that it might fall
No.
out backwards and hit me in the head. But
You had to worry about the lift off, because some guys, if they went too far forward, you'd drop it.
That's right. I don't even do those
But
anymore.
I never had much of a lift off anyway.
All right, so you came to Gold's in 72 from where?
From Michigan State.
And you were a football player.
I was a football player and a track guy, and a baseball guy, and a boxer, and
Okay.
an Indian chief, a lot of other things.
Very talented and very creative.
Well, in those days, Rick, athletes had to be kind of all around, because if you were good at one thing,
Yeah.
all the coaches wanted you to do the other sports. Nowadays, it's kind of, I mean, even though there's guys like Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, in those days, if you were great at something, the coaches made you play that. Like, I was fortunate enough to play with a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
Brad Van Pelt could have been a three-way player. He was drafted by the Tigers, by the Pistons, and ended up playing with the Giants and the Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
But he could have been a three-sport guy, which is unheard of.
Right, it is.
But they wouldn't let you do it.
But nowadays,
Nowadays, you can do it.
anything.
Times
nowadays.
have changed. But in those days, if you were a good athlete, all the coaches wanted you to, you had to be in track, you had to be in baseball, you had to be in basketball, and you had to play football.
Right,
And if you could play golf, you were on the golf team.
right. But then you picked bodybuilding.
Well, I used the bodybuilding. I was hanging out with a guy. He was on the track team with me. His name was Bill Kaiser. And we were staying over at his house, and we were actually running AAU track meets in the summer, because my parents would take me around me to run these track meets. And he pulled out these bodybuilding magazines, and I looked at the before and after, and I go, how in the hell could this really happen? And then my brother, who was, he's about your age, he's 6 or 7 years older than me, he went to Michigan State, and he came back like a semester later, and he was buffed. And I go,
Yeah.
what the hell did you do? I must have bugged him so much that he ended up buying me a set of weights. But I looked at those ads, and I said, is this for real? How do these guys do that?
Right.
And that did something to my brain. And then a lot of the athletes then, like Harold Poole and some of the guys, they were athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So they were actually using the training in conjunction to better their performance. So I
Mhm.
said, I want to run faster. I want to jump higher. I want to be a better football player. So I started training.
Mm-hmm.
And things weren't quite the same on the farm after that.
Did you start with powerlifting?
I didn't really start powerlifting, but I did weird shit, like I would lift 160 pounds with one hand.
Oh, like odd lift.
I do odd lift stuff.
Yeah.
But I basically did the basics. I did curls. I did presses. I didn't know about bent over rowing or
Right.
isolation curls. Everything was standing. There were no benches.
Okay, then what brought you out to Venice? What was your motivation to come out there?
Well, I
and train?
came out to try out with the Chargers
Oh, I didn't know that.
as a football player.
Oh.
And but I always kind of had this thing about acting. When I was in high school, I had a coach that was also the drama coach. So it was a weird thing. So he made all the football players go out for the junior and senior plays. So I thought, man, I don't want to be in that play. It's a bunch of...
Yeah.
I always thought if you're in the band or
Yeah.
if you're in a play, you're a sissy.
Exactly.
So I go, well, who's going to be in it? He goes, the cheerleaders. And I go, wow. We had this girl, Nancy Reed, who was just like a
Yeah.
knockout.
And there, of course, there's love scenes.
And there were love scenes. And the wind-up is I ended up winning the Dramatics Award. We did The Mouse That Roared I played like General Snippet with the Q bomb and this fake country, and I was hooked. But I came out to California for that and the bodybuilding because by that time I'd won Mr. Michigan, so I was tired of football. I wasn't tired of football, but I was tired of the politics.
Mm-hmm.
I would see guys, get injured. They'd train, and then the first play they'd get hurt, and the guy's laying there on the ground writhing in pain, and the coach would get in there, the other guy, send the other guy in. You were like a piece of meat.
Yeah.
And I kind of saw the business side of it, and that kind of repulsed me. So I always kind of gravitated towards individual sports. Like I was a boxer in high school in the Golden Gloves. We didn't have wrestling. I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
I think I would have been pretty good. I used to pin my cousin. He was like an NCAA champ. So I was a good wrestler. But I always liked the individual stuff because you didn't have to rely on somebody else.
I'm with you on that. I like individual competition. Team sports, I get lost by who's who. With boxing, wrestling, you can always identify the person. And it's more of a challenge when you're on your own out there. There's no one backing you up. It's just you.
Yeah, bodybuilding was as close to, knocking the guy over the head, even though you did it aesthetically.
Right.
There was really no substitute for your effort. I always figured if you were smarter and you trained harder than another guy, you could beat him.
Right.
Provided you had the genetics.
But there's also politics in bodybuilding.
A lot of politics, and I ran head on into that. I remember, guys who I thought were my friends standing next to Joe Weider and saying disparaging remarks and
Mm-hmm.
putting it in his ear and talking to the judges, and see that kind of stuff, being from the Midwest, that pissed me off, and I'd never really felt as close, even though Arnold and I and Franco and all those guys, we were great friends. I always felt like they didn't really know who I was,
Mm-hmm.
because I played in front of 70,000 people. I mean, you don't get 70,000 people in bodybuilding.
No.
So I always felt like I didn't have that much in common with most of the bodybuilders, other than
me.
other than you and Ken Waller,
Right,
because
Ken
he was a
Waller.
football player, and
Right.
Robbie,
Right.
because they were athletes.
Right.
Not to say that Arnold wasn't an athlete, but he wasn't a football player, he wasn't a baseball player, he wasn't a basketball
It
player.
wasn't a concern of his anyway.
It wasn't a concern of his, I'm not saying anything against those guys, but they had more of a European type mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was always kind of an outsider on the inside,
Mm-hmm. I understand.
as far as that goes, so I never really felt that kinship with them, even though we all trained together, and again, being kind of a loner from Michigan, I always felt like they didn't really know who I was or anything about me. They all heard that I was a fighter and all this.
Yeah.
They'd try to piss me off and do all these things.
No, I can identify with that because I came from a small town, and I was in a rock band. I played guitar, and they kind of knew it, but they didn't really know it. I had to deal with Capitol Records in the '60s. And
I
then
remember that. You
Yeah.
and Bob Schott were good.
Yeah, and then I went into
play.
pro wrestling.
Yeah.
And those guys weren't into that. They were into bodybuilding, getting on stage and getting trophies. I thought, all right, I did a few shows, and I thought that's okay, but I want to make some money with it, so I turned to wrestling. That wasn't their thing. So I was kind of outside that too. There's a circle of those guys, and then there's us who do what we do outside of that.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
Well, I remember when Arnold got into acting, he knew that I had a history in acting.
Right.
So whenever he would go, like, take a class, he would take me,
Mm-hmm.
because he kind of knew that I knew what I was doing in that arena.
Right.
So that's really where our friendship kind of blossomed, is because we went beyond the bodybuilding and tried to
For an outside interest.
build a career.